Life on the Border, Rosario San Miguel's Callejón Sucre y otros relatos. In the short story compilation, Sucre y otros relatos, Rosario San Miguel not only highlights the tribulations of Ciudad Juárez in the early 1990s, but also foreshadows and anticipates the current crisis that has plagued this border zone. In the collection, San Miguel portrays the diversity of the borderlands as she acknowledges and emphasizes its differences and undermines its vices. San Miguel's stories paint a candid picture of the streets of her native Ciudad Juárez as she delves into the many realities of life on the border. Moreover, her characters are emblematic of the broad spectrum of people and experiences that structure this zone. San Miguel does not mask the tribulations of her region, but rather demands that these realities be seen and heard as part of the Mexican nation. In a candid interview, San Miguel reveals the contradictory and complex nature of the borderlands, and I quote, La frontera es un espacio muy violento, te golpea por todas partes. El hecho de estar junto a los Estados Unidos y tener a la migra vigilándonos todo el tiempo. La frontera es como la habitamos y cómo caminamos por todos sus espacios. Nos permea por todos lados. Ahí nos confundimos y nos mezclamos todos. Ricos y pobres, mexicanos, chicanos y gringos, cholos y chorchos, hombres y mujeres, homosexuales y heterosexuales, primer mundo y tercero. La frontera es violenta pero fascinante. Cuando descubres todos sus rincones, no te puedes separar de ella. End of quote. In so much as San Miguel's writing explores the diversity and hybridity of this complex but fascinating border, her text is a cry, un llanto, to the reader, to the Mexican nation, and to those across the barbed wire fence on the other side of the frontera, to be seen, heard, and accepted by both of these nations that have created but also abandoned this unique but ailing border zone. It is not coincidental that San Miguel begins her collection with Callejón Sucre, as the story prefaces and introduces the entire short story collection. The events of Callejón Sucre take place during the course of one night. The narrative voice is that of an older ex-cabaret entertainer who is at the hospital with his dying wife, a dancer herself. At one point, he leaves the hospital and returns to the Mona Lisa, the cabaret, on Callejón Sucre Street, which is la calle más sombría de la ciudad. In this, he goes to revisit his past in the shadowy world of nighttime entertainment. The hospital, the streets of the city, and the inside of the cabaret, then, become the sites of annunciation that speak metaphorically of the mists that surround the border region. Images of darkness, illness, and a militant vocabulary lend themselves to the battle of the border region in its struggle to find a place within the national culture and highlight those who are doubly marginalized within this nightlife region of the border. That is to say, by opening her collection with this story, San Miguel draws to the attention of the reader the ills and stereotypes associated with the border region. The story begins with the narrative voice stating, and I quote, La noche no progresa. Abro un libro y pretendo poblar las horas con situaciones ajenas que me llevan de la mano, con amabilidad por las páginas de otras vidas. Fracaso. With these words, San Miguel not only establishes the darkness that surrounds this particular story, but also invites the reader into the entire text, asking them to do as the narrative voice, experience the lives of others in different situations, and in this case, the diversity and normality of life on the border. However, just as the narrative voice fails in immersing himself in his reading, San Miguel recognizes with the single word, fracaso, that her region has failed to be recognized or understood in its complex but fascinating reality. Moreover, by stating that the night doesn't progress, San Miguel highlights the state of the border as static. The manner in which it has been portrayed and misunderstood does not change. The stereotypes persist, and like the night, an image of darkness hangs over the region's identity. Therefore, by including a wide spectrum of life on the border in this collection, San Miguel insists on undermining this perpetual vision of her region and is adamant on acknowledging and accepting the diversity within her region as part of the national culture. As Homi Bhabha states, and I quote, the scraps, patches, and rags of daily life must be repeatedly turned into the signs of a national culture. That is to say, as San Miguel demands, the compilation of a national culture needs to embrace the gamut of its inhabitants, from the far-reaching borders to the inner borders, all of which comprise the nation. San Miguel's text takes the scraps, patches, and rags of the border zone and through them tells its story, while also breaking down the borders that deny these others a voice in the nation. In Callejon Sucre, the dark images of the night, the hospital, and the sick ex-cabaret dancer Lucia are all representative of the metaphor of the border as ill because of the multitude of vices associated with the region. We see how San Miguel's prose becomes poetic in nature as she utilizes strings of metaphors to emphasize this ailing battle zone. The hospital is described as a región, and the dancer's deteriorating body like a battleground which has been invaded by tubes and medicine. San Miguel extends the metaphor as the narrative voice leaves Lucia's room para no verla convertida en un campo de batalla donde la enfermedad cobra terreno cada segundo. The use of this militant vocabulary that describes Lucia's body as a battleground within this regional space of the hospital converts her into a symbol of the fight for her region to escape this image of vice. Lucia's body becomes the battleground for a voice in the nation, a space to negotiate the long-standing stereotype of the borderlands as a barbaric ailing zone, the region that sickens the nation. Furthermore, the tubes and medicine that invade Lucia's body can be read as the central political powers that wanted to heal the region all in the name of the nation. However, attempts by the central government to renovate and restore the border region were unsuccessful, as they were only interested in placing an identity upon the region, which clashed with the realities of the zone. Therein, this metaphor of invading the sick woman's flesh reveals not only how the region is depicted, but also the central government's unwanted attempts to fix the region's ills. Moreover, as we can also understand these metaphors as a tool to gain authority. As Emily Hicks notes, the use of the grotesque in the border region is related to relations of power, commenting that the grotesque is an anti-centering strategy. In some ways, this concept is similar to the ideas of Gilbert and Gubar as they state in their well-known text, The Madwoman in the Attic, that through images of disease, women writers reveal their cultural and social anxieties. Therefore, we can view this initial focus on illness and darkness as a clear signal to the reader of the tribulations of the region, and how San Miguel demands the presence of an active reader, one willing to see in actuality the extension and multiplicity of the confining borders that encompass the region. The fact that the narrative voice in Callejon Sucre is that of a male, and the only male narrator in the text, is important. In the first place, positions of power and the dominant voice in nation building have always been tied to the masculine identity. Therefore, the fact that it is a male voice who uses these dark militant descriptions links him to the outside, metaphorically the metropolis, which views the border in this way. Nevertheless, it is clear that he himself, as a border dweller and former cabaret entertainer, faces significant borders, as San Miguel makes clear the division of spaces that he passes and looks through. Besides the hospital and the cabaret, the descriptions of doors, curtains, windows, and even, and I quote, a través de los vidrios empanados de mis anteojos, symbolize the idea of looking across the border but not amply seeing its reality, the idea of always being on the other side. Thus, as the narrator visits the space of his past life that he deserted, he states, and I quote, Nada vine a buscar, sin embargo encuentro la imagen oculto del antiguo animador de un cabaret de segundo. After crossing and looking through the different borders at the end of the night, he sees this eye-opening identity. Therefore, his realization and understanding of himself symbolizes the need for the outside, the patriarchal powers, to stop seeing the border region through foggy glasses, but rather to see a clear image of the zone. For that reason, San Miguel implements this male narrative voice, the first and last male narrator in the collection. Moreover, with the use of the symbolic windows and doors, San Miguel also invites the reader to see through the borders that entrap her region and recognize that beyond the borders of the city, of the streets of the night, and the doors of the buses, bars, prostíbulos, and cabarets, there exist citizens of a nation who should be recognized as part of the national voice. It can no longer be a singular masculine voice. The individual identities of the multifaceted, multicultural border need to be seen. This coincides with the beginning of the story, where through the narrative voice's actions of reading, San Miguel invites the reader to be open to experiencing the lives of others. With Callejon Sucre, Homi Bhabha's theorizations on nation and subversion are strikingly appropriate, as he argues that the interplay among cultures takes place in the in-between places of society. The spaces of Callejon Sucre do just that, challenge the idea of nation to recognize the diversity of the border and to include the marginalized border dwellers not generally recognized as part of the larger society. With this story and the entire collection, San Miguel does not mask the problems or the diverse realities of the border, but does, however, demand that her region be accepted and included in the national culture. In this compilation of border stories, Rosario San Miguel effectively exposes the reader to a gamut of the diversity of her region. San Miguel's representations of these different identities, from the educated lawyer to the nightclub singer, serve to undermine any predisposed stereotypes of the region and its inhabitants. With its subversive undertones, Callejon Sucre challenges the region's lack of voice and true participation in the nation, and as Homi Bhabha argues, the counter-narratives of the nation evoke and disturb those ideological maneuvers through which imagined communities are given essentialist identities. As a counter-narrative of the nation, Callejon Sucre is emblematic of the struggle of the border region to speak and be heard. San Miguel does not allow for her region to be imagined and therein given a misrepresented essentialist identity, but rather systematically displays, through her diverse characters, the realities of the region, expelling myths and allowing voices to echo throughout the nation-state and across the frontera to the other nation-state that cradles but does not always nourish this complex and unique zone.